Thank you.
Well, speaking of Metro, we know received hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government during the pandemic. We used it to help the homeless, improve infrastructure, create more affordable housing in some cases. Those were one-time funds. As mayor, how do you plan to continue these programs, especially those for the homeless, once the federal funds are gone? Begin with Alice Rolli.
Well, I find it interesting that there is less accountability for some reason if it's federal tax dollars or state tax dollars than it's local. These are all our tax dollars. And so if we are not asking questions, if we are not putting in accountability frameworks, if we are not building in clawback agreements with vendors who are not performing as needed, then we are not managing all of the tax dollars that we have. So part of effectively running the city is taking responsibility for every dollar, not saying that those are federal dollars, therefore I don't need to ask questions, they're one-time dollars, they don't matter. We could have used dollars, federal dollars, to supplement, not supplant other spending priorities. We could have banked more of our local tax dollars and beefed up further our rainy day funds. If we didn't know how to spend those dollars, if we didn't know how to be accountable for them, we shouldn't have made those decisions that we did. Just because it's one time doesn't mean that you can abdicate responsibility for how those dollars are spent, how they are managed, and how the city treats taxpayer money, wherever it comes from. So in terms of asking the question of what we will continue, I think we've got to see what results we've gotten, what still makes sense, what things we no longer need because we are not in a pandemic situation anymore. And then we've got to reset to make sure that we are funding our public safety, funding our schools, and funding our infrastructure. And then if there are other programs we need to be looking at to continue, we should ask questions of what the results were.
Okay. Freddie O'Connell.
Well, the good news is we actually used most of the one-time federal money for important things. In fact, Mayor Cooper is deservedly proud of our having invested more of our one-time federal money in creation of affordable housing than any other city. That is one-time federal money, but there are still opportunities ahead to make sure we continue some of those investments. Some we're going to have to do, and this was part of the issue. We did have a couple of oversight committees, and we had to look at all those recommendations very carefully, and we had to comply with the federal requirements that were on the table. In many of those cases, we did one-time startup costs. I'm especially proud of having ensured that our 4 historically black colleges and universities took advantage of startup costs to ensure that their faculty, staff, and students will soon be able to participate in WeGo Ride, which means their university ID pays the fare. Major institutions can do this all over the city, where the institution pays a bulk rate and their employees or faculty, staff, and students get to take transit. This is a generational opportunity to both increase access around our economic generators of the HBCUs, and it's a great use of one-time federal money. We also will have, going forward, the opportunity to use more of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act, and it is those regional partnerships, the state and federal partnerships, and the awareness of how to use these dollars effectively for Nashvillians that will help us offset what we're paying as ratepayers and taxpayers in Nashville.
Thank you both.
Thank you. For the second consecutive year, Metro Nashville Public Schools has attained a level 5 value-added growth score from the Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System. It was just announced today. Are you satisfied with the results of MNPS, and how can you continue to support the development? Let's start with Freddie O'Connell.
Sure. So our daughters are both in our public schools. We are entrusting our public school system with their futures, and so far they are thriving. This is good news, but we can always work toward stronger accountability and higher expectations. For instance, we know that after the aftermath of COVID, we saw a lot of families leave Metro schools over frustrations with policies related to distance learning. We know that we could have probably seen a stronger element of participation in Promising Scholars, which is a learning loss recovery program that was available. In our middle school, we had actually more students who qualified to be National Merit Junior semifinalists than actually wound up participating in the program. To me, that's a great example of how we consistently systematically increase expectations across the board. That state measure, the Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, the TVAS Level 5, it is incredible to have earned that distinction 2 years in a row. It does mean we're seeing growth. We've seen our best ELA performance ever, to my understanding, from metro schools. These are great things and they should be celebrated, but I also want to keep our expectations higher so that our daughter and her peers, as they reach into levels where they're going to start considering careers and applying for internships, that we don't miss opportunities to demonstrate the excellence that exists. But right now, teacher pay, recruitment and retention, all of these things added up together are showing that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Alice Rolli.
I am worried about the direction that our schools are going in, and while we are seeing growth, we are still 94th or 95th out of all of the state's 95 counties in our overall results for kids and families here. We need an education mayor, one who, Carl Dean was the last one. 10 years ago, 40% of our kids were reading on grade level. We are not getting the results now today, and I think some of that is the lack of support and leadership from the mayor's office to remind ourselves and to be critical friends when we are falling short for education for our school kids. I want parents in our county to have the same choice that Freddie's children have. Freddie's children are zoned for a school that he does not send his children to. He sends them to a different school. And yet, for some reason, we believe that parent voices, when parents are voting with their feet, when there are waiting lists at certain schools and other schools are failing, we continue to tell certain communities in Nashville that their kids, if they can't provide their own transportation, need to stay at a school. And we have 19 schools today in the bottom 5% of our state, and 11 of them have been there since 2015. We have proposed that if your child is zoned to one of those schools and you're not able, like Freddie is, to drive your kids to a successful school, that we will provide that transportation assistance option so that you and your family can go to a publicly funded school within our county so that we can keep you here and we can make sure that your child is successful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Freddie?
I will say I think it's completely reasonable to be able to choose within public schools, and I think it's a little bit unusual to have another candidate try to determine what's appropriate for my family.
Okay.
I would only say it is exercising school choice, and many of the defenders of the status quo do not want families to have a choice of where to send their child to school, and many of those same defenders of the status quo elect to send their child to a more successful school, and it's the hypocrisy there that is bothersome to me.
Be happy to invite you back into our public school system.
All right, well, we are out of time.